2 or 3 hours. You know, and I've got like anyone, I have a whole series of papers here with me just to add a little bit to it. It's something like the lesson plans I used to make, and very meticulously. If about 5 minutes after the first period, you're all shot, blown completely apart. Okay, I'm going, and I want to fish some things out of there after a bit, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the peace that we were supposed to have after World War II. And most people don't know a great deal about that. And there were some things that were very, very practical that we did get. First of all, a word about the military operation of World War II, what actually occurred there. 80% of the cost of that war was borne by the Russians. And very often Americans do not recognize the price they actually paid. 27 million dead, including 16 million civilians. Put that against the Holocaust, for an example. All of Central Russia completely devastated. And initially, during the war, we said we thought we could open a second front in 1942, and then said we would open it 43, at least indicated we would. And it was opened finally in June of 1944, of course. And oftentimes, if you ask American students when the turning point was World War II, they'll point to June 1944 with the landing in Normandy, or possibly later the Battle of the Bulge. In actual fact, it was the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942-43, and that front was not opened until the Russian army, having defeated Nazi Germany there at Stalingrad, were headed west. And there was a tremendous fear that they might occupy most of Western Europe as well as the eastern part. And so the front was opened. There are a variety of other interpretations or excuses given for that particular delay. The Pacific War was our war. We fought it. But the war in Europe, by and large, the cost was paid by the Russians with a tremendous degree of death and destruction. We lost 404,000, according to the official account, and lay that up against their millions, and you get an idea of the actual cost of it. And when the final victory came in Europe and Asia, the United States emerged from the war as the preemptive power, politically, economically, socially, on the planet. And the determination behind the doors and so on was to maintain that preeminence regardless of what came along. I'm not going to bother bringing this out there. I'm going to cite two things. George Kennan in 1948, as Director of Policy for the State Department, stated point blank, in effect this, that we had about 6% of the world's population, as I recall, but over 50% of the wealth. The other people were bound to become invidious of us, and therefore it behooved us to maintain that position at all costs if we were to keep our position going. So essentially this is what happened. Military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us against came out of the Second World War and has been maintained since then. A lot of us who are veterans of World War II were concerned about some of the things that were going on under the Truman administration right after the war. In 1948, I was a student at Central Washington State College, And 22 of us wrote a letter protesting the policies, the military policies of the Truman administration. Essentially what this was a revolt, and it had much more than just the military. It had to do with the cleansing of the administration that had existed under Franklin Roosevelt. Here, and 6 months after President Truman took over, Harold Ickey said to Wallace as he was leaving the administration, they were the last two members of Roosevelt's top administration left. He said to Henry, you won't last 6 months. Wallace last 6 months, and it was all gone after that particular place. Well, what were we actually protesting in 1948? The military policies. I could name endless numbers, but I'm going to cite three examples here, and I hope this is coming through. Number one, Greece. Partisan warfare was an integral part of World War II. It is amazing the courage that these people have. And by the way, I'd like to remark about the CEOs. Their courage was tremendous. It takes an awful lot of courage to stand up when you know the overwhelming majority of the population is. So Greece, there was we're all Greeks, I think, in a sense. There was a tremendous partisan movement, as I recall, it was called the ELIS, had tremendous popular support. The United States backed Britain as they moved in with a discredited monarchy and installed a tremendously reactionary government. And a civil war ensued from 1947 to 1949. So this is one classic example. A second one I want to mention is Vietnam. We ferried the French back, well, by the way, Vietnam's administrative apparatus that the French had was utilized by the Japanese as their own apparatus during the Second World War. We ferried the French back, or at least helped ferry them back, put them in power in Vietnam, much against the wishes of the Vietnamese people. The Viet Minh were tremendously admired during World War II for the strength of the resistance to the Japanese. The first American killed in Vietnam was killed in 1946, not in 1965. Our intervention there was historic, and it was a continuous thing. Another thing that I would like to mention is Stilwell in China. That was one of the things that was most misunderstood. The Kuomintang was a corrupt organization. Stillwell, if you read his memoirs and writings on him, had tremendous respect for Mao Zedong. And it's easy to understand, simply because of the dedication, and it was recognized by Chinese experts at the time that this is pretty much in accordance with the cyclical system of revolt in China. Now I'm going to mention the actual piece because I want to see the objectives. I want to see hands here. How many of you have read the Second Bill of Rights?
Second Amendment.
Yeah, I've handed it out to you. All right. The Second Bill of Rights clearly spelled out our peacetime. An interesting thing, these people in this room, by and large, are informed. The Second Bill of Rights was outlined by President Roosevelt in his State of Union address on January 11th, 1944. And essentially it was an extension of the New Deal. There were about 8 items there. You could go to the internet and get this. All right, some of the things that stick in my mind was basically there was no more 1/3 of the nation ill-housed, ill-fed, and they are cared for. That famous speech of Roosevelt in 1933 when he took office, by the way, the figures were from Brookings Institution. They said 2/3. And Roosevelt said, that's too pessimistic. We can't go by that. So 1/3 of the nation. Some of the things that we were supposed to get were universal health care from womb to tomb. Free college education. We already have that. My wife's, the tuition over at Central Washington State was free. You know, they're talking about this now. We had free college programs. My wife's total expenses for the fall of 1946 was $180. Fees for classes, books, board, and room. Now it's interesting what goes ahead, and I'm going to cut this very short right now. It's interesting what goes on today when we think of this. Suppose that you were coming in from outer space and you were informed that there was a horrible war between two great countries, the United States and Germany. Judged by the appearance of the people today and the lifestyle and the general condition, which country would you judge to have been the victor? When I ask this question, of course, almost universally, the answer comes back. Of course, Germany won. We lost. The infrastructure is falling to pieces. Okay, I'll take this the final step then from there on. In terms of popularity among American students in studying abroad, the three most popular places are, of course, Canada, Britain, and Germany. And increasingly Germany. Why Germany? Because higher education is free in Germany. And they've had universal health care since Bismarck in the 1880s. Now the question comes back, how can you account for this? In essence, what happened, and I'm going to refer back, I'm tempted to pull out things and read them, what actually we expected the peace to be as a result of World War II. I've outlined a few things here. But anyway, coming back to what happened. What happened essentially, we lost the peace in terms of what we thought we were going to get, in terms of what President Roosevelt outlined. And the outline were not pie in the sky, judging from our historical background. They were things that were to come to us within one generation, not a long distance down, all right? And I'm going to end this with one sentence. What happened, people like myself came home, got busy in the great love affair of fall of 46 and so on, creating the boomer generation and the rest of it, and forgot more or less what we were after in the Second World War. We failed to recognize our real internal enemies. So like Huey Long said, and I'm doing research on this, when fascism comes to America, it'll come in terms of pure 100% Americanism. Now I'm going to put the question out to you. The basis of a fascist state is here. It lacks one thing, and that's the charismatic leader. And I have in mind a person who I think would do that job. And I'm watching him very, very carefully. And he is not stuck with political mud. You would never guess or pick him out unless I told you who it was.